Welcome to Capital Gains, Yahoo Finance's unique look at how government policy affects your bottom line long after the presidential polls have closed. Now, of course, today we're talking about all things RNC with former President Trump closing out with that headline event in his speech. Were we expecting a unity speech? Were we expecting him to come out fighting in light of the events of the assassination attempt? We'll break down what that means. And of course, all the policy positions that we saw coming out as well. Also looking at VP pick J.D. Vance and the implications there as well. Plus, a look at the directions that the polls are taking. But we're also going to be hearing from Veda Partners Henrietta Treyz for her insights as well to see where we move the needle from here. She'll be joining us shortly. But first, want to bring in Yahoo Finance's own Ben Werschkul and Rick Newman for their takeaways, starting with that Trump reaction there. So, Ben, a lot of people wondering in this long 92-minute speech here, what we were going to hear. Was it going to be about unity? What were your biggest takeaways?
Well, yeah, my takeaway was that there's two speeches there. I timed it out for you guys. There was a 19-minute speech that began that was the unity speech we were promised. This was Trump. He delivered lines. I even wrote some of them down because they sounded like Obama, frankly. And he gave a really remarkable recounting of the assassination plot, describing himself being on the ground, feeling like God was protecting him. It was remarkable. That was 19 minutes. And then there was 73 more minutes that was Trump being sort of the full Trump. He was going through his policy positions. This is the part of the speech I'd say people interested in policy and people interested in what Trump could do if he wins, that's the part they should watch, because he went through his policies that some people like, some people don't. The business world is mixed on tariffs, Ukraine, all these different issues that are important. And this is where he was, and it was clear he wasn't backing down at all from his agenda, at least.
Look, Ben, you just said the 73-minute part is the part that people should watch. I don't think anybody should watch this. So just to back up, political conventions are terrible TV. I can't stand watching them. I mean, they're so cringy. And I thought so. I watched the lead up to Trump last night. So we had Kid Rock. I thought that was absolutely terrible. Hulk Hogan, Lee Greenwood, and a couple other supplicants, like this to Trump. It's just terrible. What they should do is they should read Ben's stories or maybe have a glimpse at Ben's index cards. My takeaway from where we stand right now is I don't think anything at all has changed about the 2024 election on the Republican side. I think the assassination attempt had no discernible effect on Trump. I think that was just the how long was the first part, Ben? 19 minutes?
19 minutes, yeah.
Okay. I think that is 19 minutes. That is never going to repeat itself, the so-called unity part of the speech. I think Trump is as divisive as ever. I think his policies are basically the same as they were in 2024 with perhaps a couple modern twists. And I think we're right back to where we started. Trump had, the unity part of the speech was followed up by I think he ad-libbed when he said crazy Nancy Pelosi. He kind of stole a line from Biden, believe it or not, when he said, "I don't want to be president for half the country. I want to be president for all of the country."
Yeah,
I don't believe that for I don't believe that for a second. I think he wants to jam the MAGA agenda down America's throats. And I don't see any evidence that the assassination attempt changed him at all.
The way to view them is an ad. This is an ad for the party, and the question is whether it's a good ad or a bad ad. And I was sort of all ready to come on here before Trump's speech and tell you this was a Republican convention that was a really effective ad. You saw 4 or 3.5 days of it. The question is whether that 73 minutes of kind of Trump unleashed changes that at all.
Well, so most people aren't going to see that 73 minutes, right? So, so in my opinion, angry Trump is back. He probably never went away. But so, Ben, what do you think changes on the Republican side coming out of this, considering that most people didn't watch the speech, didn't watch the convention, and aren't even going to think about most of this until September, October?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there was 2 issues that we learned a bit about this week. So it was President Trump's speech, but it was present the whole week. The first one is tariffs. It's no surprise to anyone that would want to listen to this podcast that Trump likes tariffs. He's tariff man. He's described himself as that. You could say the same about J.D. Vance, his new running mate. J.D. Vance is all in on this as well. You saw it in his speech. You've seen it in his positions over the years. So those 2 guys are going to reinforce their two their instincts on this if they're elected in office, and they're going to go for it all. Another aspect of tariffs that I think the markets may underappreciate is that tariffs are an area where a president can act more or less unilaterally. The courts can try and stop him, but the president has a lot of power. He doesn't have to go to Congress to do that. So that's an important issue to watch. The other one is Ukraine. Again, J.D. Vance is an avatar of this, but we saw it the whole week of Ukraine. The GOP support for Ukraine is fading fast, at least publicly. Mitch McConnell was booed when he spoke, and Mitch McConnell has made the funding Ukraine a legacy issue for him. Candidates who want to have more support for Ukraine didn't bring it up in their speeches, and those that don't did. So that's another area that I think we learned kind of what the GOP position is here.
And there's nothing on Ukraine in the so-called platform, right?
Right. But guys, I do want to get to that because obviously you have the razzle dazzle of the actual convention. You have those who are already in that pro-Trump camp. But then if you're an investor, if you're a business and you were hoping for something pro-business in here, when you look at the candidates and you compare the policy platforms with what we actually heard at the convention, do they actually make sense? Do they actually correlate?
Yeah, this is an overall topic. I'm trying to explore this in a piece today for Yahoo Finance, is that you could, depending on what you look at, you could take both views. One, the view that there is a populist wing in the party. There was evidence of that. Union leaders spoke on Monday. The president of the Teamsters. I thought I would turn to a union rally or the Democratic convention when he came on.
Biden campaign heads exploded at that.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Biden's like, no, I'm the union candidate. You're not supposed to be there.
Yeah, and so there's that strain of it. But I did a lot of reporting yesterday, kind of taking people's temperature that know about this stuff. Are they worried about what Vance means and what the Teamsters means? And they're not. They're basically, people realize that Trump is going to have a pro-business agenda, most likely in office. The question is the party shifting long-term so that maybe not in this next administration, but in a Vance administration or in another administration, the GOP kind of leans into its populist side.
Did you just say in a Vance administration?
Hey, that's what I do.
Man,
I jump ahead.
So 2028, J.D. Vance for president. I mean, that's obviously where we're going. By the way, so just so people know, we're taping this on Friday morning. It's July 19th. So 24 hours ago, what we were all talking about was J.D. Vance, the nominee, and how did he do in his speech. And so now that has passed because people don't really care that much about the vice president. But a couple points about J.D. Vance as the vice president nominee. First of all, he's the first millennial on a presidential ticket. And honestly, I think that's a win for the Republicans. I mean, everybody in America wants to move on from these old geezers who run the country, and the Republicans now have a young person on the ticket. I think that is really helpful to them. Second, can I call him JD? I mean, is that okay? Is that too familiar to call the vice president's candidate?
Are you cool like that?
Yeah, I'm just going to call him JD for now. So JD attacked Wall Street twice. He said, "We're done catering to Wall Street," and I was like, well, when did we start catering to Wall Street? I mean, is Biden catering to Wall Street? I don't think so. But anyway, so he attacked Wall Street, and I thought, well, let's see what Trump has to say about it, and if this is like a new Republican attack line. And it turns out Trump didn't say anything at all about it. So I guess JD was just freelancing, Ben? I mean, do you feel like there was no coordination between the go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's emblematic of the different sort of wings of the MAGA movement they represent. I do think JD genuinely believes that this has been a big part of his political identity. When you read Hillbilly, he grew up in circumstances that give him a real populist viewpoint. That being said, when you talk to folks who are looking at what's going to happen in 2025, there's very little sense that any of those policies are going to be in place. We mentioned corporate taxes. J.D. Vance has talked about raising corporate taxes. Trump reiterated in his speech last night that he wants them lower, and that's what Trump talks about. I would take Trump's word on that. J.D. Vance has talked about praise for Lina Khan, who's currently at odds with Google. No one thinks Lina Khan's still going to be in the job if in a Trump-Vance administration. So the question is whether it's a long-term thing and whether in years ahead those policies start to be felt. I mean, the other headline this week, and it's so Trump, I guess, is that he picks J.D. Vance. He also, in this Bloomberg interview that was released this week, muses about having Jamie Dimon as his Treasury Secretary. So to imagine a meeting of Trump's top advisors where there's J.D. Vance and Jamie Dimon around the table is a remarkable idea.
Okay, what are the odds that Jamie Dimon would be Treasury Secretary under Trump?
Very low. I mean,
can you go lower than zero?
It's very low. I mean, he's said publicly, and me and my colleague David Hollerith, who's a really great banking reporter here, people should follow, who's close to Dimon's people.
Dave's great.
Talked to a source familiar with Dimon's thinking that was he's not interested in politics at this point. He's looking to run his bank, and that's what he's focused on. And I think it's low. I think there's a lot of gamesmanship here about who asks who and whether you float them and what your signals you're sending. But I don't expect a Treasury Secretary Dimon.
All right, we'll have to put a pin in the conversation for now as Capital Gains heads for a break. Stay with us. All right, welcome back to Capital Gains. We're back here with Rick Newman. I want to bring in our guest here, Veda Partners Henrietta Treyz. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. Want to get the Biden angle on this. We only heard President Biden's name mentioned once in that Trump speech. What sort of scenarios are we looking at this point, Henrietta?
My expectation is that the race, as much as it's been upended in the last 3 weeks, is about to get even more insane from here. My forecast, with really high odds, 50 to 70%, depending on what time of day you catch me on, is the president will be voluntarily stepping down from the campaign. And we will either move into a situation where Kamala Harris, the vice president, is the de facto nominee, or we have sort of a mini convention. My expectation at the end of that is that Kamala Harris is the one to watch for the rest of the next crazy 4 months that we're headed into.
So I just want to remind everybody, so the timing here, we're doing this on Friday morning, July 19th, and it feels like this campaign could change, honestly, that Biden could drop out at any moment. So Henrietta, I get your newsletters. Thank you for sending them to me. You had 70% odds that Biden would drop out earlier in the week. Then you lowered it to 50, and now I think you're back to 70. But I would say 70 is too low at this point. I mean, do you feel like, I mean, especially when you're just reading, when Nancy Pelosi now is on the case, and I mean, you're sort of these senior Democrats, they clearly don't want to come out and say publicly he needs to go. And I'm talking about Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, and Barack Obama mainly. That's sort of the key four. But reading between the tea leaves, all of the indications are that all of these people and many others are telling Biden he has to go. Do you read it that way?
Absolutely. And in all fairness, I launched those 70% odds a while back, and as a registered investment advisor, can't front run my clients. So don't hate the player, hate the game. But I would say that, if you are on the wrong side of Nancy Pelosi, you should change sides. And that is something that I've learned, from having worked in the House, having worked in the Senate for the last 20 years. This is not a place where you want to be. So I think that there is a real reverence within the Democratic Party for a sitting president who was a senator for 36 years, passed two massive reconciliation bills and two massive bipartisan bills, the CHIPS Act and the BIF, that was done with 51 seats in the Senate. That's an unimpeachable record, very impressive. And they just want to sort of pay deference to that. But I think that time has come to an end. When I write to clients, I said T-minus 7 days, and that was 7 days ago. Today is the beginning of the end. It's the end of the safe zone, as I put it, for President Biden. And I expect the party to migrate into a new direction by the end of this weekend.
So if Biden goes, Kamala Harris, she's the natural. By the way, that's an amazing coffee mug. Is that like a gallon?
Roughly, yes.
I'm envious. So Kamala Harris seems like the most likely step in, but it could be somebody else. So instead of speculating on who it might be, would the Biden policies stay with the campaign, or do people need to think that a new candidate might have different policies?
Next year we're going to be writing a tax bill. So I would suggest to everybody, turn your attention to the House Ways and Means Committee. The Democratic staff on House Ways and Means is extraordinarily experienced. They have a sense of unity within that conference that if Democrats were able to, win the top of the ticket and hold on to the House have presented legislation on comprehensive tax reform that was not even refuted at the committee level. I mean, they have done sort of the Lord's work over the last couple of years. So even if Kamala Harris comes in and she has a different agenda, it's going to default to the House Ways and Means Committee Democratic tax package. And that's
so
everybody
who chairs that committee?
Well, I think you really want to focus on staff. Obviously, you have all the committee members. The Republican side of the aisle is relatively new, with Representative Smith leading as the chairman. But then you've got Richie Neal and the rest down on the Democratic side. And they're going to have to come to a consensus if this is a situation where Democrats are in control of the White House, and they're going to have to work together. Passing legislation through the Ways and Means Committee is no small feat. You're going to have to come up with $4.6 trillion if you want to extend all of the existing rates as is. That is not a tax cut. That is just extending everything we have today.
Can you go to the Democrat House Ways and Means website and find their plan in a way that's easy to understand?
Absolutely. You can definitely go to their website. And then if you want the detailed score, go to the Joint Committee on Taxation and look for the House Ways and Means Committee Democratic Tax Package. Yep.
Got it. Rachelle, jump in. You had something.
Yeah, so I have a question. Obviously, you laid out a couple of extreme events there. You have the potential for Biden dropping off the ticket, but also a Trump landslide. What would the implications be for investors? Because we didn't really hear a lot in terms of the meat and potatoes of how Trump would pay for these policies that he was touting in his speech.
He won't. Anyway, go ahead, Henrietta.
No, we could shut down the podcast right now. That's exactly correct. He will not. I think one of the most proprietary pieces of information that I have, that I work, all year, every day to acquire, is to understand the temperature within the Senate Republican Conference for deficit appetites, or within the Senate Democratic Caucus for deficit appetites. Right now, the deficit threshold is $2 to $2.5 trillion. I started in DC in 2007. We were coming into the Great Recession, and you'll remember Obama's first $787 billion stimulus bill. That was massive at the time. We are now more than double that. $2.5 trillion in deficit increases is what we're looking at. So you're going to need to identify, if you want to pay for this tax bill, which they are not going to do. I mean, the debt, federal deficit, fiscal responsibility, those are words that are not even in the Republican platform. Not even in there. It's a pretty remarkable departure. So when you ask how are we going to pay for it, JD Vance has signed off on taxing corporate mergers. That, in the grand scheme of things, that's like 50 cents. You need trillions of dollars to offset the cost of this bill. You're going to have to seriously question whether you can get the SALT cap maintained. It's a $10,000 cap on your deduction that generates $1.2 trillion in revenue, and blue state Democrats and blue state Republicans, 18 of whom are in districts that Biden won in 2020, are going to have to vote to proactively hike those taxes again. COVID sort of messed up our sample set because everybody moved and we got things skewed, but that was a real problem for those voters. So I think they're going to have a really protracted fight that will take all of next year. And one thing I would say is, while we're fighting over the tax bill, be mindful that the former president's primary offset is to impose tariffs. And if you want to start generating revenue from tariffs, you have to start that on day one to prove to Republican senators, hey, this is going to be revenue that's coming in. So those tariffs, aka taxes on consumers, are going to be in effect probably within the first 100 days of a hypothetical Trump administration. And the tax bill is not going to pass until late December. The 2017 bill didn't pass till December 22nd. So we're going to have a very uncomfortable year where tariffs are higher and rates are uncertain.
Sell.
It's certainly going to be that long road to November. Everyone will be sort of scratching at the collar there. Henrietta Treyz, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Henrietta.
I appreciate that so much for joining us on Capital Gains.
Thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. We do want to bring back in our very own Ben Werschkul. Obviously, polling, it could be very hard to gauge, as we mentioned, COVID in the middle of that, throwing things off as well, and then on the heels of a very unconventional RNC convention in light of the assassination as well. What are the polls telling us, Ben?
Yeah, so the overall polls are showing a Trump lead. We have a lot. There's a ways to go to kind of figure out what the effect of this convention was, and even some of the assassination. But what we've seen is a little bit of movement toward Trump pretty much every single day. Some of the most interesting polling I'm seeing is to go off Henrietta's the conversation is around Biden and his replacement. There's a lot of work being done there now that's coming out, and it's very political. You're seeing it from media polling, you're seeing it from Democratic groups, you're seeing internal polling leak out. And it's kind of all about Biden's viability, which there's now getting an increasing consensus that he's not viable, and then it's the Biden replacement. So I put down a couple here just to flag for you guys. Harris public policy polling is a Democratic aligned group, and they have new numbers about Harris in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Those are the two states Democrats have to win if Democrats have a chance this fall, and it shows her winning those states, which is an interesting thing, and it's clearly kind of making the case for her. There's polls on the other side from Democratic groups, and a memo that got a lot of traction this last week was from Blue Lab Analytics, and that showed Harris outperforming Biden, which that flip happened about a week or two ago, but it also showed other candidates who might perform even better. Josh Shapiro, the Pennsylvania governor, Gretchen Whitmer, the Michigan governor, two on there. One intriguing name who's known to the business world is Mark Kelly, the Arizona senator. He's been really involved in the Biden administration in chips. I have no evidence that he has any interest in running, but he also performed really well in these swing states. So there's a lot going on in terms of polling what could happen if Biden drops out.
So I think there's a million caveats with any poll that puts Harris, Kamala Harris, or some other Democrat at the top of the ticket. Nobody else has been campaigning,
Right.
and so people know who Kamala Harris is. I don't think anybody outside of Pennsylvania really knows who Josh Shapiro is, and most people probably don't know who Mark Kelly is, a senator from Arizona. Whoever, if there is a new candidate, that candidate. Number one, I think that candidate gets a fresh start. So you can expect that there'd be like a relief rally in the Democratic polls, like, oh, thank God it's not Biden. We have somebody younger and somebody new. So I could see a bump there. But then that candidate has to prove herself or himself. And we don't know what kind of presidential candidate Kamala Harris would be. I mean, what we do know is that in 2020, she was not a good presidential candidate. I mean, she dropped out kind of like in the first round of dropouts, not even in the second round. When it was basically Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden. She ran kind of a disorganized campaign. She didn't have any really solid messaging. So is she going to be better this time if she ends up being the person? Maybe she will be a blowaway candidate. Who knows? But she could also make mistakes and fall flat. So a million unknowns. If we have a new candidate, it's almost like all the polling up to this point doesn't matter. We just start over.
It's literally a new race because it's new.
It takes it all off the table. Now we're up against the finish line here, guys. But I do want to quickly get the takeaways of what you think is the most important thing and what you're looking ahead to. Ben, starting with you.
I mean, I think looking ahead, we've been talking about it for this whole segment is what happens with Biden. It's clearly coming to a head in the coming days, one way or another. He's currently in Delaware, isolating with COVID, and there's just the chatter is increasing, and I think it's only going to be more now that the Republican convention's over. So that's the main thing I'm watching in the next couple of days.
Requiem for Joe Biden. I think that's where we go here, and he should, if he does leave, he should retire with some. He should try to retire with some dignity and say, "It's time to pass to the next generation," because it is.
And we'll just have to see whose hands that falls into. Appreciate you guys, as always. Rick Newman, Ben Werschkul, and of course, a big thank you to our guest, Henrietta Treyz, as well, for joining us here on Capital Gains on Yahoo Finance. Thanks so much. Welcome to Capital Gains, Yahoo Finance's unique look at how U.S. government policy will impact your bottom line long after the presidential polls have closed.
Our bottom line, it's still the economy, people.
We've got team coverage from New York to Los Angeles, but we start right here in Washington, D.C.
You can catch Capital Gains on all your favorite podcast and streaming platforms. You can't afford to miss it.